In 1816, the world experienced what historians call the year without a summer. Mount Tambora had erupted in Indonesia the previous year, sending ash into the atmosphere, blocking sunlight and creating global crop failures. Famine swept across continents. This is the accepted explanation. But here's what doesn't align cleanly. Between 1810 and 1825, over 200 major urban construction projects across Europe and North America were either abandoned mid-build or drastically scaled back. Not delayed. Abandoned. Canal systems designed for populations 3 times their actual size. Rail corridors surveyed through regions with no immediate economic justification. Government buildings erected in frontier towns that barely had residents. The infrastructure wasn't proportional. It preceded demand by decades in some cases. And the abandonment happened in the same narrow window. By 1820, something had shifted. Let's be clear from the start. This script examines architectural and infrastructural patterns from the early 19th century that don't fit neatly into conventional historical narratives. It references a topic sometimes called Tartaria, a term used in certain communities to describe perceived anomalies in the historical record. This is not an academic consensus. It's an interpretive lens. What follows is a documentary exploration of observable evidence, not a claim of hidden history. Now back to 1816. The official record states that volcanic winter caused the disruptions. Crop failures led to economic collapse, which halted construction. This is reasonable. But it doesn't explain why so many of these projects were over-engineered for their context in the first place. Take the Erie Canal. Construction began in 1817, just after the volcanic winter. It stretched 363 miles and was designed with a load capacity far exceeding what the regional economy of upstate New York required at the time. Towns along its route didn't exist yet. The canal wasn't built to meet demand. It was built in anticipation of something larger. Or consider the United States Capitol building. Its expansion in the 1850s included a dome weighing nearly 9 million pounds, held up by iron framework that required precision casting techniques not widely available in American foundries at the time. The materials were imported. The labor was specialized. The dome itself was disproportionate to the building's function. These aren't isolated cases. In Russia, the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg underwent massive renovations between 1837 and 1839 after a catastrophic fire. The reconstruction happened in just 15 months, employing over 6,000 workers simultaneously in sub-zero temperatures. The speed defied the logistical norms of the era. And the architectural consistency, vaulted ceilings, neoclassical facades, symmetrical layouts, mirrored structures being built at the exact same time in Washington, Paris, and London. There's a pattern here. Not of conspiracy, but of coordination that exceeds what decentralized national governments would typically achieve without modern communication infrastructure. Now let's add another layer. Between 1815 and 1825, municipal records across dozens of cities show something unusual. Sudden population surges that don't correspond with immigration data. Philadelphia's population jumped by 40% between 1820 and 1830, but port records don't show a proportional influx of ships. New Orleans saw similar growth without corresponding economic drivers. The numbers exist in census records, but the mechanisms are unclear. At the same time, architectural surveys from this period reveal buildings with features that seem redundant. Basement levels with ventilation systems more advanced than what surface floors required. Multi-story stone structures in towns with populations under 2,000. Water drainage systems in arid regions where rainfall didn't justify the expense. The timing is consistent. The scale is excessive. The explanations are fragmented. One case stands out: the city of St. Louis. In 1823, civic leaders commissioned a city plan for a population of 100,000. At the time, fewer than 5,000 people lived there. The grid system laid out streets, blocks, and infrastructure for a metropolis that wouldn't materialize for another 30 years. Why plan so far ahead in an era when most cities expanded organically, block by block, as population pressures demanded? It's not just North America. In England, the railway mania of the 1840s saw companies lay track through rural areas with no industrial base. Lines were built to towns that didn't need them, financed by investors who expected returns that had no rational basis in contemporary economics. Thousands of miles of rail were surveyed, graded, and constructed in a frenzy that collapsed by 1847, leaving half-finished viaducts and empty stations. The common thread: infrastructure before necessity. And then there's the architectural language itself. Neoclassical revival dominated this period across continents. Greek columns, symmetrical facades, grand staircases, domed roofs. From the British Museum to the Capitol in Washington to the Kazan Cathedral in St. Petersburg, the aesthetic is nearly identical. Same proportions, same materials, same techniques. This could be explained by cultural exchange, by the spread of Enlightenment ideals, by the influence of Freemasonry and its architectural symbolism. These are valid frameworks, but they don't explain the speed. They don't explain the simultaneity across regions with limited communication. They don't explain why so much of it happened in the narrow window between 1815 and 1850, peaking in the 1820s and then tapering off. The timing raises questions that don't have clean answers. What happened in 1816 wasn't just a volcanic winter. It was a fulcrum point. Before it, the world looked one way. After it, construction patterns changed. Ambition scaled back. Projects were abandoned. And what emerged afterward felt like reconstruction rather than continuation. The evidence is in municipal archives, city plans, engineering surveys, and census records. It's not hidden. It's just not synthesized into a single narrative. And that's where the discomfort starts. Let's stay in the United States for a moment, because the pattern becomes more visible when you focus on a single region over time. The Erie Canal wasn't an anomaly. It was part of a broader infrastructure wave that swept through New York State between 1817 and 1825. During this period, the state funded 14 separate canal projects, most of which connected small towns to waterways that didn't yet carry significant commercial traffic. The Champlain Canal, the Oswego Canal, the Cayuga Seneca. These weren't responsive to demand. They anticipated it, and the scale was enormous. The Erie Canal alone required 363 miles of excavation through wilderness, across rivers, over elevated aqueducts. It employed 9,000 workers at its peak, most of whom were Irish immigrants who arrived specifically for the project. But here's the friction. The canal's engineering specs called for a depth and width that wouldn't be fully utilized until the 1850s. It was over-dimensioned from the start. The same thing happened with American railroads. By 1840, the United States had laid more than 3,000 miles of track. Most of it ran through regions with sparse populations. The Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, chartered in 1827, built lines into the Appalachian interior where there were no cities, no factories, no immediate economic justification. The track was there first. The economy followed decades later. This is the inverse of how infrastructure typically develops. You build roads where people already travel. You dig wells where people already live. You don't construct a 300-mile canal through empty land and hope civilization catches up. But that's exactly what happened. Now shift to Britain. The British railway boom of the 1840s is often framed as speculative mania, a financial bubble driven by irrational investor enthusiasm. And that's partially true. But it doesn't explain the engineering. Between 1844 and 1846, Parliament approved over 9,000 miles of new railway construction. Surveyors mapped routes through the Scottish Highlands, across Welsh mountains, into rural counties with populations measured in the hundreds. Viaducts were built over valleys where no roads existed. Tunnels were bored through hills that separated villages with no trade between them. The Settle-Carlisle line, constructed in the 1870s, crossed some of the most inhospitable terrain in England. It required 23 viaducts and 14 tunnels. The longest viaduct, the Ribblehead, stands 104 feet high and stretches a quarter-mile across a remote moorland. Thousands of workers lived in temporary shanty towns during construction, enduring brutal winters. Over 200 died. Why build it? The official reason was to compete with rival rail companies for northern routes. But the investment never matched the return. The line operated at a loss for most of its existence. The infrastructure exceeded necessity. Again, let's go further. Government buildings. Washington, D.C., in the 1820s, was a swampy, underdeveloped town with a population under 20,000. Most of it was empty plots and dirt roads. Yet the federal government was constructing monumental buildings designed for a capital 10 times its size. The Treasury Building, begun in 1836, was the largest government building in the nation at the time. It took 33 years to complete. Its granite columns were quarried in Maine, transported by ship, and hauled overland by teams of oxen. The interior featured vaulted ceilings, marble floors, and cast-iron supports. The scale wasn't proportional to the bureaucracy it housed. The same logic applies to the Patent Office, the General Post Office, and later the Capitol Dome. These weren't government offices. They were monuments, and they were being built in a city that barely functioned as a capital. Cross the Atlantic again. St. Petersburg, Russia. Between 1820 and 1850, the city underwent a construction boom that rivals anything happening in Western Europe or North America. The Kazan Cathedral, the Admiralty, the General Staff Building, all erected with neoclassical precision, symmetrical layouts, massive stone facades. The General Staff Building, completed in 1828, stretches over 1,800 feet and curves around Palace Square in a perfect arc. Its triumphal arch stands 92 feet high. The structure required thousands of laborers and tons of imported stone. And it was built by a centralized autocratic government that had the power to mobilize resources on a scale democratic nations couldn't match. But the aesthetic? Identical to Washington. Identical to London. Identical to Paris. Same columns. Same proportions. Same architectural grammar. This could be cultural diffusion. It could be the influence of Freemasonry, which was active in all these regions and promoted neoclassical ideals. It could be elite European architects traveling and sharing designs. But the timing is compressed. The execution is synchronized. And the infrastructure scale consistently precedes the populations it was meant to serve. There's another element. Administrative similarity. During the early 19th century, cities across Europe and North America began adopting nearly identical urban planning models. Grid systems, numbered streets, zone districts, public squares, radial boulevards. Paris underwent Haussmannization in the 1850s, tearing down medieval neighborhoods to create wide boulevards and uniform building heights. Barcelona did the same with the Eixample district. Washington, D.C. was planned from scratch with a radial grid hybrid designed by Pierre L'Enfant. These weren't gradual evolutions. They were systematic reorganizations. And they required massive displacement. Entire neighborhoods were demolished. Populations were relocated. Property rights were overridden by state authority. The justification was always modernization, sanitation, and efficiency. But the speed and uniformity suggest coordination beyond what typical municipal governments would achieve independently. Now let's talk about storage. In the mid-19th century, cities began constructing enormous grain silos, warehouses, and storage facilities that far exceeded local needs. Buffalo, New York, became the grain storage capital of North America in the 1840s, with facilities capable of holding millions of bushels. At the time, Buffalo's population was under 50,000. Liverpool built the Albert Dock in 1846, a massive warehouse complex with cast-iron columns and fireproof brick vaults. It could store cargo from hundreds of ships simultaneously. But Liverpool's trade volume in the 1840s didn't justify that capacity. The docks were built for a future that hadn't arrived yet. Same with electrical grids decades later. When Thomas Edison built the Pearl Street Station in New York in 1882, it was designed to power 400 lamps. Within 2 years, demand exploded and the grid had to expand rapidly. But the initial infrastructure, the underground conduits, the distribution framework, had been laid with excess capacity from the start. This is standard practice now. We call it future-proofing. But in the 19th century, when capital was scarce and construction was labor-intensive, over-engineering was a financial risk. Yet it happened repeatedly. The question isn't whether these projects existed. They did. The records are clear. The question is, why was so much built in anticipation of growth that hadn't yet materialized? Whether this reflects inheritance, convergence, or coordinated planning remains unresolved. But the pattern is undeniable. The word Tartaria appears on European maps from the 16th through 19th centuries. It wasn't a mystery. It was a geographic designation for the vast regions of Central Asia controlled at various times by Mongol successor states, nomadic tribes, and later the Russian Empire. Tartary derived from Tatar, referring to Turkic and Mongolic peoples. The term was imprecise, a catch-all for territories Europeans didn't understand well. By the late 1800s, as Russia consolidated control and Western cartography became more accurate, Tartaria disappeared from maps. Not because a civilization was erased, but because the political geography had been clarified and incorporated into recognized empires. That's the historical record. The modern reinterpretation is different. In certain online communities over the past decade, Tartaria has been reimagined as a lost advanced civilization whose achievements were systematically obscured. Proponents point to the architectural anomalies we've discussed: over-engineered infrastructure, neoclassical uniformity, construction timelines that seem implausibly fast, and argue these indicate inherited technology rather than 19th century ingenuity. This interpretation isn't supported by mainstream archaeology or history, but it persists because it offers a framework for patterns that feel unresolved. So let's examine 3 ways to interpret the evidence we've covered. Model 1. Standard historical progression. Everything we've discussed can be explained within conventional history. The Erie Canal was visionary planning by DeWitt Clinton and his engineers, who correctly anticipated New York's economic growth. The neoclassical architectural style spread because European architects trained in the same academies and wealthy patrons wanted fashionable designs. Railway mania was speculative capitalism run amok, no different from tech bubbles today. Over-engineering happened because governments and investors miscalculated demand, leading to waste and financial loss. The speed of construction in places like the Winter Palace, brutal labor conditions and autocratic state power. The timing around 1816? Coincidence, or at most, a response to post-Napoleonic political stability and the beginning of the Industrial Revolution's capital accumulation phase. This model accounts for the evidence without requiring any suppressed history. It's the default academic position. Model 2, coordinated reset. This interpretation suggests that between 1810 and 1850, a deliberate reorganization of urban and infrastructural systems occurred across multiple continents. Not through conquest, but through coordinated policy among elite networks, Freemasons, banking families, royal courts, secret societies, who shared architectural and urban planning philosophies. The evidence: identical building styles across vast distances, synchronized construction booms, administrative standardization, and infrastructure that anticipates rather than responds to population growth. The mechanism wouldn't require a lost civilization. It would require networks of power that transcended national governments, operating with shared goals and timelines. Secret? Not necessarily. Just not centrally documented in a way historians later synthesized into a coherent narrative. This model treats 1816 not as a volcanic disruption, but as an inflection point where previous plans were either abandoned or recalibrated. The reset isn't apocalyptic. It's administrative. Model 3. Inherited infrastructure. This is the interpretation most associated with alternative Tartaria research. It proposes that many 19th century buildings weren't constructed during that period at all, but were inherited from an earlier, more technologically advanced civilization. The neoclassical style wasn't fashion. It was restoration or repurposing of existing structures. Evidence cited includes basement levels that appear to be buried first floors, suggesting ground-level changes, architectural consistency that seems too uniform for independent development, construction timelines that seem implausibly fast given the technology of the era, and a global pattern of World's Fairs in the late 1800s showcasing temporary plaster buildings that were demolished afterward, which some interpret as covering up pre-existing architecture. This model requires the most speculative assumptions. It asks us to believe that a civilization capable of continent-spanning construction left almost no archaeological trace, no written records in languages we can verify, and no material culture beyond the buildings themselves. It requires that thousands of historians, archaeologists, and engineers across 2 centuries either missed this or participated in obscuring it. Mainstream scholarship rejects this model, but it remains the most emotionally compelling for those who feel conventional history doesn't adequately explain the scale and speed of 19th century infrastructure. All 3 models attempt to explain the same observable facts. The difference is in how much historical rupture you're willing to accept. Now return to 1816. The year without a summer disrupted agriculture, caused famine, triggered migration, and destabilized economies. That much is certain. But it also coincided with the end of the Napoleonic Wars, the Congress of Vienna's redrawing of European borders, and the beginning of the Industrial Revolution's exponential phase. Multiple transformations happened simultaneously. Sorting causation from correlation becomes nearly impossible. What if 1816 wasn't the cause of the disruption, but a convenient explanation for changes already underway? What if the infrastructure we see as overbuilt was simply the tail end of a previous era's ambitions, abruptly halted and then slowly resumed under new political and economic conditions? The evidence invites examination, not certainty. Here's what we know without speculation. Between 1810 and 1850, infrastructure was built at a scale and speed that consistently exceeded immediate demand. Architectural styles were remarkably uniform across continents with limited communication. Urban planning followed similar templates in cities with vastly different cultures. And much of this activity clustered around a narrow historical window. Whether you interpret this as visionary planning, elite coordination, or inherited technology depends on how you weigh the evidence and what historical framework you trust. The term Tartaria functions as a metaphor now, a placeholder for the discomfort that arises when official narratives feel incomplete. It's not about a lost empire. It's about the gaps between what we're told and what we observe. The buildings still stand. The canal systems still function. The rail lines still carry freight. The infrastructure is real. What remains unresolved is the question of intent and origin. History is written by those who control the archives, and archives are curated, edited, and sometimes burned. The absence of evidence isn't always evidence of absence, but it's also not proof of presence. So we're left with the same choice every documentary offers. Examine the evidence and decide for yourself what weight it carries. The patterns exist. The timing is compressed. The scale is disproportionate. Whether that reflects genius, conspiracy, or inheritance is a question that won't be settled here. But it's worth asking.